This happened a few years ago when I was working the graveyard shift at Always Convenience. The store is more like a truck stop than a regular convenience store. So there was supposed to be at least 2 people on duty. However, we were always short-staffed. My boss Liam would constantly say, "Aaron, I know it's tough working the shift alone, but I just can't find anyone to cover it." And so night after night, I worked alone. To make things worse, we couldn't find anyone to cover my shift for days off, so I ended up working every night without a break. Most nights it was just me and the store radio to keep me company. Hollyville was a small town with barely any traffic at night. In fact, the whole town only had one post office, a Dollar General, a school, a small restaurant, tiny liquor store, and a handful of churches scattered around. There wasn't much to it, so most of the customers I saw during my shift were truckers and travelers passing through. The radio mostly played the kind of music the locals loved: Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, Hank Williams Jr., and other classic country artists. It wasn't really my style, but after hearing the same songs on repeat every night, I had them all memorized, whether I liked it or not. I would often mimic the way Johnny Cash started his songs. If you ever listened to his music, you know he often began with, "Hello everyone, I'm Johnny Cash." I had it down perfectly after hearing it so many times. On the night everything began, the song Jackson by Johnny Cash and June Carter was playing. I was standing behind the counter when Lynn walked in. Lynn, well, he was a regular, always coming in for a Skull Wintergreen fine cut. Though most people would just call it Skull Original. But that night, something seemed off about Lynn. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And even now, I'm still not sure what it was. "Hey, Lynn, the usual?" I asked. He gave a silent nod, but I noticed him absent-mindedly picking at his neck. I'd seen that kind of behavior before, but it didn't make sense. Lynn wasn't the type of person to use drugs, at least not that I know of. Lynn was the kind of old-timer you'd expect to find in a small town like Hollyville. He was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s, with weathered skin that told a lifetime of hard work and long days spent under the sun. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, especially around the eyes and mouth, the kind that came from years of squinting under the sun and smoking too many cigarettes. He was tall but hunched slightly, his frame lean and wiry, as if he had never quite lost the build of his younger years. His hands were rough and calloused, with dirt forever trapped under his fingernails, no matter how much he washed them. He always wore the same thing: faded blue jeans, scuffed-up work boots, and a flannel shirt that looked like it had been around longer than some of the buildings in town. Over it, he usually had an old beat-up Carhartt jacket that smelled faintly of tobacco and motor oil. Lynn wasn't much of a talker. When he did speak, his voice was raspy, slow, and deliberate, carrying that thick southern drawl that made every word seem heavier than it should be. He never smiled much, but when he did, it was a small, tired grin, as if he wasn't sure whether he should be happy or just let the moment pass. Most people in town knew him, but no one really knew him. He kept to himself, living out on the edge of town in a little trailer surrounded by old trucks and rusted tools. Some folks said he had lost his wife years ago. Others said he never had one. Whatever the truth was, Lynn never talked about it. He just showed up and got his Skull Wintergreen and gave a nod and went on his way. Now, compared to Lynn, people often describe me as someone in their late 20s, early 30s, with the kind of tired eyes that make me look older than I really am. Working the graveyard shift at Always Convenience for so long has left me with a permanent case of exhaustion, the kind of amount of that no caffeine can fix. My dark hair is usually messy, like I just rolled out of bed, and there's always a hint of stubble on my face. Not because I'm trying to look rugged, but because I just don't care enough to shave every frickin' day. I'm tall, but not particularly built, more lean than muscular, with the kind of posture that comes from standing behind a counter for hours on end. My uniform, if you could call it that, is a faded store polo that's seen better days, paired with old jeans and sneakers that have long since lost their comfort. Liam has often said I smell faintly of stale coffee, an ever-present scent of convenience store air freshener. Ain't that the truth? Many of the regulars have said I have a dry, somewhat sarcastic sense of humor, the kind that helps many survive the long, lonely hours of the night shift. Not trying to brag, but I'm observant, picking up on little details about people that most wouldn't notice, partly out of boredom, partly because I've always been the type to read between the lines. I really don't mind the solitude too much, but some may say I've got the small town itch, the feeling that I'm meant for something more than stocking shelves and ringing up truckers at 2 a.m. Despite my cynicism, People say there's a quiet kindness to me. I know most of my customers by name. I remember their usual orders, and I listen to their stories, even if I never ask for them. And believe me, I never ask for them. I'm not one to pry, but I pay attention. And on this night, everything changed. Attention might have been the only thing keeping me from missing the signs that something was very wrong. I watched as Lynn kept picking at his neck, a nervous, almost compulsive motion. Something about it felt off. "Lynn, are you okay?" I asked. He gave a quick nod, barely making eye contact, and walked out of the store. But I knew he wasn't okay. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Still, I brushed it off, convincing myself it wasn't important. I went back to pacing around the store, checking the shelves and making sure everything was in order when Lisa and Adam walked in. Now, Lisa and Adam, how do I begin to explain them? Lisa, in her prime, had once been a rising star in the world of advertising. She worked for a major agency, and at one point her work was recognized across the country. Back then, she lived in New York, thriving in a fast-paced city life. That was when she met Adam. Unlike Lisa, Adam was a Hollyville native. He had moved to New York to pursue a career in engineering, and he was ambitious and full of promise. When the two met, they hit it off instantly. Eventually, Adam brought Lisa back to Hollyville to meet his family, with plans to return to New York together. But life had other plans. While in town, Adam reconnected with an old friend, one who introduced him to methamphetamines. It wasn't long before he spiraled into addiction, and Lisa caught up in his downfall and followed. Their bright future unraveled in a matter of months. Lisa lost her prestigious job at the agency, and Adam was expelled from his university after repeatedly ignoring their attempts to contact him. What started as a promising life turned into a desperate struggle. They fell deep into addiction, their world shrinking until all that remained was the next high. Now, they lived in a rundown trailer park on the outskirts of Hollyville, a far cry from the lives they had once dreamed of. Despite their struggles with addiction, Lisa and Adam weren't bad people. At least not when they weren't chasing their next fix. Lisa and I had plenty of conversations during the slower nights. She often reminisced about New York, the life she once had, and the career she lost. There was always a sadness in her voice, like she still couldn't believe how far she had fallen. Adam, on the other hand, he could be decent when he was sober. But when the meth took hold, his temper ran short, especially with Lisa. There were more than a few times when I had to call the police to have him removed from the store. Wherever they showed up, they would ask Lisa if she needed a ride somewhere or if she wanted to press charges. She always shook her head no, and with no clear evidence of abuse, there wasn't much the police could do. I always felt bad about the situation, wishing there was more that I could do. But some things were just out of my hands. That night, though, something felt off. As they walked into the store, I greeted them like I always do. "Hey, Adam. Hey, Lisa." But neither of them responded. That was odd. Then I noticed Adam. He was picking at his neck, just like Lynn had earlier. Weird, but I didn't think much of it. I moved behind the register as Adam wandered the aisles, looking for something. Lisa approached the counter, offering me a familiar, weary smile. "Hello, Lisa. How are you?" "I'm doing all right, Aaron. How are you?" I told her I was fine. It was a slow night, and small talk seemed like a good way to pass the time. But before our conversation go any further, Adam walked up and cut in. "Do you have any aluminum foil?" he asked. I looked at him, confused. Aluminum foil? That didn't seem right. From what I'd gathered from cop shows, meth addicts usually looked for things like light bulbs and salt. Foil, though, that was for something else. Crack, wasn't it? Anyways, Lisa and Adam had always been about meth, as far as I knew. Had Adam dragged Lisa further down addiction? I hope not. But knowing him, that was probably exactly what had happened. I sighed and tried to keep it light. "Foil? You baking cookies?" It was half a joke and half an attempt to, feel him out. But instead of laughing it off or brushing off, Adam snapped, "What the fuck does it matter?" Then he made this sound, something inhumane, something I couldn't fully describe. Looking back, that should have been my first clue that something in Hollyville was very, very wrong. But at the time, I just brushed it off. After all, nothing ever happened in Hollyville. It was then that Lisa shot Adam a sharp glare, and he quickly muttered an apology. "Sorry, Aaron." I could tell it wasn't with much sincerity, but I shrugged it off and replied, "It's cool, dude. Don't worry about it." I told him I thought we might have some foil down on one of the aisles and pointed him in the right direction. But even as I spoke, something about the whole interaction didn't sit right with me. Lisa stood off to the side of the register, her eyes fixed on the lottery tickets. Something she did almost every time she came in. As I watched her, the door chimed and another customer walked in, breaking the tense atmosphere. The door chimed as the customer walked up to the counter, his voice casual and unaware of the madness about to unfold. Yeah, I need a $13.50 on pump 16. I nodded, taking the $20 bill from his hand, punching the numbers into the register. As I handed him his change, he turned to Lisa and gave her a friendly smile. She smiled back, though there was a stiffness in her expression, like her mind was somewhere else. Then out of nowhere, Adam came charging toward us. I had never seen anyone move that fast. His footsteps were heavy, erratic. And before I could even process what was happening, a guttural, animalistic screech tore from his throat. It was like anything I'd ever heard. Raw, unhinged, and inhuman. Then he lunged. His hands clawed at the customer's face, fingers digging in like he was trying to rip the flesh away. The man screamed, staggering backward as Adam continued his relentless attack. Instinct took over. Without thinking, I vaulted over the counter and shoved Adam away with all my strength. He stumbled, but instead of reacting like a normal person, like a man, I swore to God, he growled at me. A deep, primal snarl that sent ice-cold terror down my spine. Lisa gasped, stepping back in shock. Adam's wild, bloodshot eyes snapped to her, and in a flash, he lunged again. Not happening! I swung my fist, connecting hard with his face. The impact sent him spiraling to the ground. The customer wasted no time. He bolted for the door, still screaming as he disappeared into the night. A second later, the screech of the tires tore through the quiet town. I turned just in time to see his car speeding out of the lot, gas nozzle still attached to the pump. Shit! I ran outside, waved my arms. Hey, stop! Too late. The hose snapped free, the nozzle still lodged in his gas tank as he vanished down the road. My mind barely had time to process that before I remembered. Adam. I spun around and rushed back inside. Lisa was standing stiff, her eyes locked onto Adam, who somehow was already back on his feet. Then I noticed his face. Where I hit him, his skin wasn't bruised. It was wrong. Like the bone underneath had shifted, distorting his features. It was impossible, but I saw it with my own eyes. He reached up, gripping his face, and then he adjusted it like it was a goddamn fucking mask. Something in my stomach turned. My whole body screamed at me to run. Lisa was just as frozen as I was. Her expression stuck between disbelief and horror. What the hell is going on? I muttered, but there was no time for an answer. Adam lunged again, but at this time I grabbed Lisa's wrist and yanked her toward the door. Move! I barked. We barely made it outside before Adam was on us again. His movements were erratic, his speed unnatural. He had lost all sense of being human. There was only hunger in his eyes. Survive. That was the only thought I had. I shoved Lisa back inside, scrambling in after her and slamming the door shut. Adam threw himself at it with terrifying force, rattling the glass. I held the door closed with everything I had, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Lisa's eyes darted wildly. Think. The keys. They're in the register. Get them now. She hesitated, then bolted toward the counter. Adam kept throwing himself against the glass, but he wasn't thinking clearly. He wasn't even trying to break it. Lisa fumbled through the register and tossed me the keys. My fingers trembled as I jammed the key into the lock and twisted it. Click. Locked. I turned to Lisa. Go! Lock the back door. She didn't waste a second. Sprinting to the back of the store, I stayed behind watching Adam through the glass as he stood eerily still, his chest rising, falling in ragged breaths. And then he looked at me, straight at me. A cold chill ran down my spine. Then he screamed. Not a human scream. This was something else. Something wrong. Lisa was suddenly beside me again, and together we watched in horror as Adam reached up, fingers digging into his own face, and then ripped it off. Skin and flesh peeled away, revealing raw, pulsing muscle and exposed bone. He didn't react, didn't flinch, just stood there, letting the remains of a face dangle in his hands. I lost it. I turned and stumbled to the nearest trash can and threw up everything in my stomach. Lisa was pale as a ghost, her hands shaking as she whispered, "What the hell is happening?" I wiped my mouth, my hands still trembling. I didn't have any answer, but one thing was clear. This wasn't meth. This was something much, much worse. Adam bolted into the darkness, disappearing beyond the reach of the gas station's dim parking lot lights. His inhuman shriek still echoed in my ears, and my pulse pounded as I turned to Lisa. "Okay," I snapped, trying to stay my breath. "You better tell me what the hell is going on right now." Lisa exhaled sharply, running a trembling hand through her hair. "I don't know," she said, her voice still small and shaken. I clenched my fists. "Damn it, Lisa, I know you and Adam do drugs. The whole town knows. The whole damn town. But that wasn't meth. What the hell are you two on?" She flinched, guilt flickering across her face. For a long moment, she said nothing, staring down at the floor as if the answer was written there. I knew I was pushing too hard, but how the hell was I supposed to act? Her boyfriend had just attacked a man, growled like a rabid animal, and then ripped his own goddamn face off. Finally, Lisa broke the silence. "You're right," she muttered. "It's not meth." She swallowed hard, glancing up at me. "A few days ago, we went to West Legion, like 20 minutes from here." I nodded. I had lived there once before moving to Hollyville. It was a bigger, rougher, a place you didn't linger in after dark, unless you had a damn good reason. Lisa kept talking, her voice quieter now. "We met this guy, Jake, or Jacob or something. He had said he had some new product." I narrowed my eyes. "Not meth?" She shook her head. "No, something else. He had it wrapped in aluminum foil, told us you had to put your head under it and use a straw to suck it up." She shuddered. "Called it Romero." The name sent a strange chill through me, though I had no idea why. I had watched enough police shows, read enough news articles about drug busts, but I'd never heard of anything like that before. Lisa rubbed her arms as if she were suddenly cold. "He said you could snort it like cocaine too, but smoking it made it hit harder, faster." I frowned. "There's no way some drug could do that." I gestured toward the parking lot, toward the space where Adam had stood minutes ago, where he'd peeled the flesh from his skull like a goddamn horror movie come to life. I mean, maybe a bad trip or some psychotic episode, but his face, Lisa. He ripped off his fucking face. Lisa's breathing hitched and tears welled up in her eyes. I hesitated before asking the next question. "Did you take it?" She shook her head, biting her lip, so hard I thought she might draw blood. "God, no," she whispered. "I've always been a one kind of poison kind of girl." A bitter laugh escaped her, quickly swallowed by a sob. "And I've been sober for 3 months now. But after that," she wiped her face roughly, "I don't think I'll ever touch anything again. Fucking Christ." Lisa turned away, walking toward the corner of the store, hugging herself, like she was trying to keep from falling apart. Then she broke. Her shoulders shook as she let out a strangled sob, burying her face in her hands. I stood there frozen. What the hell had we just witnessed? And most importantly, what the hell was Romero? I stepped closer toward Lisa, placing a hesitant hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," I said softly. "He's gone." She shook her head, still crying. "You don't understand," she choked out. "From what Jake said, he sold it to several people." A cold knot twisted in my stomach. One Adam was bad enough. But more? I exhaled sharply, trying to think rationally. "Okay, but how many people in Hollyville would actually take it?" Before Lisa could answer, a loud crash echoed through the store, coming from the back. My blood ran cold. I spun around, my heart hammering. It was coming from the back door. Without thinking, I sprinted toward it. Lisa close behind me. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached the door and peered through the narrow window. My boss, Liam, stood outside, his face pale with terror. His eyes darted around frantically, his chest heaving like he had just been running for his life. Lisa fumbled with the keys beside her, her hand shaking as she jammed the right one into the lock. The second then she turned it, I yanked the door open, grabbing Liam by the arm, pulling him inside. Lisa slammed the door shut and relocked it immediately. Liam stood there gasping for breath, sweat dripping down his face. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. Liam, in his late 40s, a wiry man with a gaunt face that made him look older than he was. Stress and years of running the gas station had carved deep lines into his forehead, and his thinning salt and pepper hair was usually slicked back with too much cheap gel, and I mean cheap gel. He always wore the same faded blue work shirt with his name stitched onto the breast, paired with jeans that were perpetually stained with grease and coffee. His sharp, hawk-like eyes rarely missed anything, but right now they were wide with fear, darting around the store as if expecting something to come crashing through the walls at any moment. He was ragged and sweat beaded on his brow, soaking into the collar of his shirt. He smelled like stale cigarettes and gasoline. The usual scents clinging to him, but there was something else now, something metallic like blood. Liam was tough. Had to be, running this place and dealing with the regular trouble that came through, but I'd never seen him like this before. His hands trembled at his side, and for the first time, he looked completely lost. Whatever he'd seen out there shaken him to his core. Lisa was in her early 30s, but looked older, worn down by years of addiction and hard living. She had once been beautiful, and you could still see glimpses of it in the sharp structure of her cheekbones and the deep green of her eyes, but now her face was gaunt, her skin pale and stretched too tight over her features. Dark circles sat heavy under her eyes, making her look like she hadn't slept in days. And her once vibrant auburn hair was now dull, tangled, and streaked with faded blonde highlights from a dye job long past its prime. She wore an oversized hoodie, likely one of Adam's, hanging off her thin frame like a cloak. Underneath, her jeans were ripped at the knees. Not in a stylish way, but from wear and tear. Frayed threads dangling like they were barely holding together. Her hands shook slightly, a nervous habit she had never quite kicked, and her fingers bore the telltale signs of a past filled with bad choices, burn marks, faint scars, and nails bitten down to the quick. But despite all of that, there was something in Lisa's eyes, something still human, still fighting. When she looked at you, really looked at you, it was like she was searching for something to hold on to. Right now, though, those green eyes were wide with terror, shimmering with unshed tears. Her lips trembled as she tried to hold it together, but her whole body betrayed her, stiff and trembling like a trapped animal that had just realized there was no way out. The three of us hurried into the back storage room, my mind racing as I turned to Liam. "Liam, what's going on?" I demanded. Liam let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I was outside with my dog, Oscar, when I saw Lynn walking down the street. He tripped or something. I don't know, but I went to help him up. As soon as I got close, he lunged at me. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Lynn? That didn't make any sense. He wasn't the kind of guy to get caught up in drugs. At least I didn't think so. But maybe I had no idea what the drug type was really anymore. Liam continued, his voice trembling. I grabbed Oscar and I tried to run, but I tripped. Before I could get up, Lynn grabbed my dog and... He hesitated, like the words were too insane to say out loud. Lisa took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. He bit him? Liam nodded, his face pale. Yeah, he fucking bit him. And with minutes, Oscar, he went feral, snarling, snapping, like he didn't even recognize me. I ran as fast as I could, but I didn't know if he was okay, or if he's even my dog anymore. I swallowed hard, glancing toward the janitor's closet. My eyes landed on the pile of wooden boards and planks leaning haphazardly against the wall. Looking back, I couldn't tell you why I noticed them at that moment, but I'm glad I did. Before I could say anything, the sound of shattering glass rang through the store. My heart jumped into my throat as the three of us bolted toward the noise, and then we saw him. Oscar stood at the front, his body twitching unnaturally, his eyes wild and unfocused, but he wasn't alone. A group of people, if you could even call them that anymore, stood just beyond the broken glass. Their skin sagged and shifted like it wasn't attached right, their eyes hollow and gleaming with something inhuman. They all looked like Adam. They all looked wrong. The figures standing outside the shattered glass were human, at least they had been. Now their bodies twitched with unnatural spasms, like puppets with tangled strings. Their skin was loose in some places and stretched too tight in others, as if something underneath was shifting, trying to break free. Their eyes, once normal, were now sunken pits, glowing faintly with a feverish light. Their mouths hung open, lips peeling back and over jagged stained teeth. Some of them had torn flesh, revealing raw muscle and sinew beneath. One of them, a woman I vaguely recognized from town, had deep gashes along her arms, but there was no blood, just exposed tissue. Dark and dry like old leather. Their movements were jerky and natural. They didn't walk much as they lurched forward in sudden bursts, heads tilting at odd angles, as though they were listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. A few of them twitched violently, fingers clawing at the air, jaws snapping aimlessly. Then there was Oscar. The once friendly dog now stood with his back arched, his fur matted and uneven, his mouth stretched far open, far too wide, revealing teeth that seemed longer than they should have been. His gums had darkened to a sickly gray, and foam dripped from his maw. His breathing was shallow and rapid, punctured by a deep, guttural growl that barely sounded canine anymore. The things outside didn't moan. They didn't speak. They simply stared at us, their empty eyes locking onto ours with a hunger that wasn't just for food. It was something else, something worse. The three of us bolted through the store, weaving between aisles as those things pursued us, their footsteps uneven, their ragged breaths hissing through broken teeth. We had no choice but to fight. I threw up in the janitor's closet and grabbed 3 shovels, handing one to Liam and the other to Lisa. We braced ourselves and struck out, using every ounce of strength to shove them back to keep them from clawing and biting at us. Their fingers were cold, their nails jagged and yellowed, reaching for us with mindless desperation. I swung hard, my shovel colliding with the side of a woman's head. A face I recognized, though. The person she had been was long gone. The impact had knocked her down, but it didn't. It should have. Her head twisted unnaturally on her neck, but she kept coming. Her mouth moved, her eyes locked onto me with the same empty hunger. Her body moved separately from her head as if the two weren't even connected. Without thinking, I swung again and again, and it didn't stop until there was nothing left of her head but pulp. Only then did her body finally collapse, twitching once before going still. That was it. That was the weakness. "Go for the head! Sever the brainstem!" I shouted. Lisa and Liam caught on fast, swinging with everything they had. One by one, we cut them down, but Oscar, the poor creature, took off into the night, vanishing before we could stop him. We had to deal with him later. He wasn't a dog anymore. Not really. Then I looked outside. More of them. Dozens. Maybe more than that. Worst, I saw movement. People running, screaming, trying to escape the creatures closing in on them. A handful of survivors sprinted toward the store, their faces twisted in terror. "Get inside!" I yelled. They didn't hesitate, rushing through the doors before another wave of those things reached them. I turned to the others, my heart pounding. "Board everything up now!" Lisa, Liam, and the newcomers scrambled to grab whatever wooden supplies we could find, hammering planks over the doors and windows. It wouldn't last forever. Maybe not even through the night. But we had no choice. We had to keep those things out. I didn't know what the world outside looked like anymore. If this was just our town, or if it had spread further. If the world was falling apart. If the human race was doomed. All I knew is that we had a chance. A small one, but a chance. At least we knew how to fight them. The only way to stop them was to destroy the brain. Otherwise, they would keep coming. Once we had the doors and windows barricaded, we dragged whatever heavy furniture we could find in front of them, shelves, table, anything sturdy enough to slow those things down. Escape would have to wait. Right now, survival was all that mattered. As we worked, I turned to one of the newcomers, hoping for answers. "Do you have any idea what's going on out there?" She hesitated for a moment, still catching her breath, then finally spoke. "My name's Ronan," she said, her voice shaken but steady. Ronan was in her late 20s with sharp, angular features and piercing green eyes that darted around the store, taking in every detail like she was constantly calculating an escape route. Her short, jet black hair was messy and damp with sweat, strands clinging to her forehead. She was dressed in ripped jeans and a leather jacket, both smeared with dirt and dried blood. Whether it was hers or someone else's, I couldn't tell. There was something hardened about her, like she had seen too much already, but there was also a fire in her expression, a survivor's instinct. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, more like adrenaline that hadn't worn off yet. When she spoke, her voice had a rough edge, the kind that hinted at a life that had never been easy. Ronan finally spoke, her voice steady but laced with exhaustion. "I've been taking care of my elderly father ever since I had to fire his nurse Amber." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. She sighed before going on. "Last night, I had put my father to bed when Amber showed up out of nowhere, begging for her job back. Something about the way she said it made me pause. Can I ask why you had to fire her?" Ronan gave a short nod, her expression darkening. "I knew she had a drug problem when I hired her, but she swore to me she was clean. Turns out it was a lie. She was stealing my dad's things, selling them so she and her girlfriend could buy meth. I couldn't have that, so I fired her." I exhaled sharply, glancing across the room where Lisa was talking to Liam. What was it with this town and its drug problem? Hollyville wasn't some sprawling metropolis like Dallas, Houston, or San Antonio, yet in the few past years it had been swallowed whole by meth and fentanyl. And now there was this new drug, Romero, turning people into monsters. Ronan kept going. "Something was off about her tonight. She was acting like all twitchy and kept picking at her neck." I guessed, already knowing the answer. She nodded. "Yeah, she said she needed work because she owed some guy named Jake or Jacob money for something called Romero." Jake. That name again. He was the one that had sold Romero to Adam. That much I knew. But now, hearing Ronan's story, it was clear he wasn't just some low-level dealer. He had to be someone bigger. Someone pushing out a new product. But why? What kind of person would sell something like this? Did he even realize what Romero did to people? That it turned them into something inhuman? Or was he as clueless as his buyers, unleashing hell without even knowing it? Ronan continued, her voice tightening with the memory. "I told Amber no, firmly, but she made this sound. A growl, I guess. Then she lunged at me. I pushed her away, but she kept screaming that she was going to kill me, so I ran. I ran up the stairs with nowhere else to go, hoping she'd stop, but she didn't, so I shoved her. I didn't mean to, but I did." She paused, glancing around. Everyone was listening now, hanging on to her words. I thought she was dead, she finally went on. The stairs in my house are steep, and she fell hard, but she wasn't. She stood back up, but her head was... Ronan swallowed. Backwards, completely turned around. Then right in front of me, she twisted it back into place. Her skin... She trailed off, but I didn't need her to finish. Lisa and I had seen it with Adam. Then Lisa, Liam, and I had seen it again when those things attacked. Ronan took a deep breath and pushed forward. I ran into my father's room. I grabbed him and we ran, but he tripped, and Amber, she was on him in an instant. He didn't even get a chance. That moment she bit him, he changed, just like she had. I didn't wait. I ran. I just ran. I don't know how long, but eventually I ended up here. Silence settled over the room, and then slowly others started speaking up. Their stories were the same, different faces, different names, but the horror, it was identical. While everyone sat around swiping stories of survival, I wandered through the store, searching for an old radio. I remembered Liam kept one in the office, so I headed there to the office to get the radio. The door was open. I froze. I didn't remember unlocking it. The lights were off, the room swallowed in darkness. Cautiously, I stepped inside. Liam was sitting in the chair, unmoving, the radio resting on the desk in front of him. Something felt off. I reached for the light switch, but before I could flip it on, Liam's voice cut through the darkness. Could you leave it off? His tone was strange. Quiet, almost scared. I hesitated, but then let my hand drop. All right, I said, stepping closely. You okay? Yeah, he muttered. I'm okay. His voice said otherwise. Then why don't you want the lights on? Just don't worry about it. That only made me worried. Ignoring his protest, I flipped the switch. The harsh glow flooded the room. That's when I saw it. A stretch of light showed a scratch down on Liam's face, jagged, red, fresh. One of them had gotten him. Liam inhaled sharply, his eyes meeting mine. There was no point in pretending anymore. Yeah, he whispered. One of them got me. His voice cracked. Aaron, what am I going to do? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know how long it took for someone to turn, but I did know one thing. Liam was going to. It was inevitable. Liam, we need to tell the others, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. His reaction was instant feral. No! He snapped, almost hissing the word. I took a step back, startled. Then just as quickly, his tone softened. Please, no. I hesitated, but I knew what had to be done. Slowly, I grabbed the radio from the desk, started backing away. That's when I saw it. The final moment before Liam was gone. His body tensed, his breathing hitched, and then he lunged. I barely dodged in time, stumbling out of the office and slamming the door shut behind me. My heart pounded as I broke off the handle, barricading the door and whatever I could find. I didn't want to kill him, but if he got out, I would. I rejoined the others, the radio clutched in my hands. We sat there for what felt like hours, listening to static. We waited for news. Any news. Anything. Then a voice finally cut through the static, a radio DJ, his voice shaking. We're being asked to stay indoors. Please do not go outside under any circumstance. We are under attack. Hours later, he returned. People, I've been informed that the CDC and FEMA are on their way to deal with what's going on. Again, stay indoors. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep. When I woke, Lisa and Ronan were shaking me awake. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. It was 10 a.m. The store was swarming with soldiers, Marines, Army, the whole deal. Somehow they had made their way inside, clearing out whatever was left. It's over, Ronan murmured. One of the officers found Liam in the office. He was dead. Later, they told us it had been a viral outbreak, that it was handled, that there was nothing to worry about. But we knew the truth. It wasn't a virus. It was Romero, a drug that turned people into something else, something we'd only seen in horror movies. Zombies. That's what it was. I know how it sounds, crazy, impossible, but I know what I saw that night. The creatures we called Romeros weren't just addicts gone bad. They were the living dead. Before we released, they made sure that we understood one thing. If we ever spoke about what happened, we would disappear. A black site. A place no one would ever find us. That was a year ago. Lisa stayed clean. She and I are good friends now. Ronan and I have been dating for 3 months. I was there for her when she buried her father. The three of us, Lisa, Ronan, and me, became close after that night. But I never went back to that place. I got a job at an old oil refinery far away from that store, from those memories, but it still haunts me. Everything that happened that late one night.